All right, next up, we have our friend from Novartis in the house. Drew, good morning. It's so nice to see you.
Good morning.
Drew, we are excited to talk about Big Pharma and next generation engagement with omnichannel personalization today. That's a lot of big words. But Drew, I'd love to just first start with inviting you to tell everybody in the audience a little bit about your role at Novartis.
Sure, and thank you for the invite and welcome all. I'm the Vice President for our marketing operations at Novartis.
Fantastic. And I'd love for you to, folks to know that I'm going to reserve a little bit of time at the end of our session with Drew. So definitely, as you have questions for us as we go along, pull up the Q&A or your chat box and throw those questions in there, and we'll get to some of those at the end. Drew, I'd love for you to paint a picture of Novartis for our audience today. Talk a little bit about the scale of your systems, how many websites are in the portfolio, all the different customer, patient, doctor data touch points that the team is working with.
Sure. So Novartis is headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, and the main headquarters from the US is in New Jersey. We're probably number 1 or 2 in most of the markets around the world, and we're probably in the top 10 in the US. We have medications in both pharma as well as oncology. So we serve hundreds of thousands of patients, and our physician bases are also, our target audiences are in the hundreds of thousands, and you can imagine millions in the patients as well.
Absolutely. It's a vast audience for sure. And when we were speaking last week, we talked a little bit about some of the differences in the way that Novartis is challenged to communicate personally in a personalized way with some of those various audience segments, whether they be a healthcare provider, a patient, a caretaker, a physician specifically. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I really like the way that Heidi teed this all up in terms of her 3 main things of being informed and personalizing the experience, as well as how do we leverage machine learning and AI. And at Novartis, we're going through it as well. And we embarked last year on a large initiative called Next Generation Engagement, which really meant that, how we're going to change our go-to-market model in terms of making things very personalized. In the past, we have been going very static communication by channel, right? And then we really needed to change, how do we do all that to create personalization? And that involves a whole host of things, because for what happens in the world of pharma, for each therapeutic area, you may have a target, you may segment your physicians into 4 segments, and they have then additional micro segments and then use cases, and also the patients have their journeys and the physicians have their journeys. So if you think about a matrix, right, you could be trying, the most important thing is, right, what we call 4 C's. We have the customer, the content, the cadence, and the channel. So you want to make sure that when you're sending a communication and a message to a healthcare provider, you want to send the right message at the right time. You don't necessarily want to create an awareness message when they're already an advocate. And this is similar stuff to the patient. So it's a real challenge. And we really had to look internally about how to really transform from static assets to how do we really go about creating modular assets, and then what are the technologies and tools and processes that we have to create. So because in the pharma world, right, we don't sell product, right? There's nothing on the shelf to go buy. It's really the conversation that you as an individual have with family members, and then with your physician, who then writes the prescription.
Yeah.
So if you think about one of the most important things is we're really in the business to really help people make the most informed decision. And there are a lot of statistics out there, right, that maybe only 1/3 of the patients who really need medicines are on medicines. And when someone gets a prescription, maybe 20 or only 30% don't fill it. And then maybe when people are on, about half of them drop off after 6 months.
Right.
So you would think in a world where we have so much information flow, it's a real challenge to get the right information to the right person at the right time. And I could personalize that if that would be helpful.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of going back. Tell us a bit about Novartis before a CDP, and what was it that kind of prompted the team to say, I think we need to explore an option to help us with this?
Probably like similar organizations, because we're very highly regulated. Pharma is typically not on the cutting edge, leading edge of activities, right? So upon coming in, we really noticed we had a significant gap, and we might have hundreds, if not thousands, of website properties out there, but they were being sort of tagged and managed by literally hundreds of different types of agencies. And then you can only imagine the complexities associated with that, and the lack of uniformity on how you're even doing your data layers and your containers and your tagging. And then even what data are you actually capturing? And what does that mean? And how do you create consistency? So we had a big gap. We did not have a CDP. And so then some of us who have had experience in the past with technology got together and formed a team to help the organization understand the value proposition and the gap, and then go about creating RFI and RFP for that.
And what all weighed into that decision and in the creation of the RFP? What were some of the key criteria that you knew you had to check those boxes?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you have relevant use cases for your particular industry or your company. So for us, we started with a proof of concept, right? To see if and what would work. And then from there, we were successful, and then initiated 2 proof of values to validate what we believed we could achieve. Mm-hmm. And we chose a US brand to do the proof of value. And it works actually quite well in terms of the impact and level of increase in activities that we saw using the proof of value. I won't go into the details, but it's really important to establish what we want to accomplish from a proof of concept, that technically it would work, but beyond that, what is the value that it'll bring to the organization? Establish those criteria, and then ensure that people are aligned, and then move forward. And then we have the appropriate metrics, and it was actually quite successful.
Great. And so going through that implementation process after selecting your CDP, going through the implementation, what is some of the success that Novartis has experienced?
So what's really interesting is that we then internally had multiple meetings to gather individual use cases from all of the various stakeholders throughout the organization, from our data, we have decision engine, we have brand people, we have market access, we have, and it goes around all the different brand people. And we wound up collecting 153 individual use cases. It's quite amazing. And we went through a really interesting mapping process, right? From the functional areas, and then where in the journeys those potential use cases could be applicable. Then we went back to the team, we had those review sessions, and then we took another step to we create what we call journeys. So we then prioritize the top 10 journeys, and a journey would be a combination of multiple use cases that we can then say, hey, these would be applicable across multiple brands, right? To address sort of in-market issues, whether it's awareness, whether it's access, whatever it is, right? So, and then we created those prioritization. Further to that, we then, thinking creatively out of the box, what else can we do with these things? And in the pharma world, that we do a lot of paid media, and there are some restrictions on the data flowing through. And we were able also to come up with some unique ways to actually use our databases, lookup tables when people came to our sites, and not only be able to pass through, let's say, those unique physician, ID numbers, they call it, numbers, as well as click-through rates. But we also established internal tagging for our content and our campaign metadata. And now we're able to check and see out of our actual content in the marketplace, what is causing that action and what action are they taking on our own properties. So we then take that and now we can say, okay, you know what? We're sort of using the CDP now as an aggregator. And it's another tool in our MarTech armament that we can use to better inform and enrich our profiles. As I mentioned before, right, we have our own market research where we take all our docs and we put them into 4 different segments, but then there are micro segments. And then are they in the right segment? Are they in the right micro segment? Oh, what content did they respond to in the marketplace? And we can then take that and feed our own master database, right, to adjust and enrich those profiles. And then secondly, because in the world of pharma, there's a lag in getting data from prescription, but the CDP also enables us to do things in real time, right? NISPEX actions and so forth, if we want to do that. And that can then inform our other downstream activation channels.
153 use cases is
yes.
Quite the accomplishment. Definitely
Yes.
success to be celebrated by many at the company, I would imagine.
Right. Absolutely. If I can just take 2 minutes to tell why this is relevant to people, right? Why this is important. As Heidi mentioned, right, it's about being informed. Many years ago, my dad was diagnosed with almost died one night from what's called a blast phase of his white blood cells. And the next day he was given a diagnosis of disease. And at that time, there was no cure. And so the doctors gave him 1.5 years to live. So my wife and I went to the medical libraries and did the hard research and opening, this before the internet. And after 4 days, I found this publication about some doctor in Texas, MD Anderson, doing some experimental research on interferon. And I called him up, got my dad down there. Turns out that was helpful for him and in taking daily injections. But this doctor turned out to be the godfather of the pill that cured my father's disease. So here's an example where, as a patient or helping a patient, right? Where do I get the information? How do I get the information, right? Now, years later, my dad winds up moving to Florida and he's seeing a hematology oncologist that changed his dosing of that medication. And it went below a dosing that was even efficacious or worked. So my dad got really sick. So it's just one example where getting the right information to the right person at the right time could have helped me as the patient consumer, as well as having an educated physician who didn't even understand the dosing for the medication.
Yeah. Yeah,
and I'm sure people in the audience, I'm sure everybody has a similar story about someone in their family, because that's happened to me on multiple occasions.
Yeah. It's a powerful story, and I love that connection that you can bring that passion from your personal experiences to work, and just the passion that you and the team have for helping people with information at the right time. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. Well, that's why we are in the business, right? We're in the healthcare business to help improve the quality of people's lives. That's what drives us into this business, and that's our entire intent.
Love that. Drew, I know cookieless is a huge factor affecting everybody on the call today. Third-party cookies are going away. And just in general, the loss of data signals is a factor that's impacting so many businesses today, whether they be healthcare or outside of healthcare. Talk to us about how the team is approaching some of these huge shifts in the way that you've connected with your audiences.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do have people in our organization that are really experts in that area. And we have, frequent conversations with them all the time. There are some other technologies out there that try to help solve for that, right? But at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, that the more we can move away from paid media, just things that we own and serve, right, is best. And that's what we're trying to do in some areas, as I mentioned before, right, where we're working with our media partners to be able to connect, where people are coming from and how we look it up on our side when they come to our owned properties, and then connect the dots and all that. There's other ways for using, and we use Telium for that now. There's other ways that we could use Telium for some of the, there are organizations that will say, we've got a target audience of, I'm just making this up, 250,000 docs, right? But only 10% are registered with us. And when in our field, and like most regulated fields, you need to have someone registered, give you permission in order to be able to reach out to them. Well, some organizations have said, we're gonna hit, we want to achieve a certain number, right, of target physicians that we want to get registered on our properties, right? So we no longer have to rely upon whether paid media or other sort of data sources, right, to connect with them in that personal basis. And that's a big challenge, right? Because there are so many different sources of data on clinical data, right? And where is the real truth? And that's a big challenge in the marketplace, right?
It is. Another big challenge in the marketplace is the rapid expansion of privacy regulation.
Yeah.
Being in a highly regulated industry like healthcare, alongside government and others, financial services, talk about how Novartis is working to position itself to stay flexible as privacy regulation and staying in compliance with that continues to evolve globally.
Yeah, so we do have an entire global team that is focused on compliance. It's extremely important to us from an audit, regulatory, and compliance ethics perspective. And that could probably take an entire day to have that conversation about. But I would say that, Telium can be a component of that, right? It's just like all the other sort of policies, procedures, and applications that we are going to employ. So it's a part of that, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Drew, I believe we have a couple of questions coming in through the chat for you. The first question is, how did you restructure or build a team around this new CDP ecosystem to support it, not only systems wise, but also with processes, governance, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thanks. So I was fortunate that I had experience in before and led a large team of commercial operations in the service side. So I was familiar with it. But the first steps we did was, I would say, once you've made a decision, right, for the selection of your CDP, and let's say in this case, Telium, is partner with them. So what we did is we had vendor A, let's say, right, who was providing some tag services for all the different agencies, and it was decentralized. So the first thing you want to do is you want to think about how you plan to centralize that. And what I would suggest you do is work with your Telium partners. We did that here. They have a whole service team. And then what we did is have them sort of do the first, identify who your service potential partners were. We did the RFPs, right, to many companies, and we had them come in and pitch. And we selected who we thought was the best. But at the same time, we partnered with Telium to ensure that that we were going about it and they were going about our partner the right way with support from Telium. So we want to do the Telium first, have our partners sort of shadow. Then the second one, our partners would do it, Telium would shadow, and then we can go with our partner. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I love hearing that approach. Okay, one final question for you. This attendee says, Drew, thank you for sharing your knowledge. How is Novartis creating a single customer view with first-party data and third-party data like social media, et cetera?
Well, that's a really good question. But let me just share with you this. What we are moving towards, and we started to implement, is modular content and we've created our own tagging taxonomy approach. We have created our own internal decision engines leveraging machine languaging and AI. We do source a whole host of various data providers that we aggregate in, cleanse, and then align with our segmentation. And then what we do is leveraging the information that we acquire back in the marketplace, using things like Tealium and other stuff, right? We then, our decision engine then learns more about our target audience and then orchestrates the communications across our channels, leveraging our modular assets.
Fantastic.
That's as far as I can go for tonight.
No, that's great. That's great. Very insightful. Thank you, Drew. This has been such a fun conversation. The Novartis team is so innovative in their approach to data, and it's just been an absolute treat for all of us to get to hear from you today. So thank you so much for joining us at DB for Healthcare.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite and have a great day.